Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Trash Talk. This is the show where I, your host, DJ Wooldridge, like to talk trash with friends old and new. And today I have a very special guest. Tommy, introduce yourself to the kids at home.
Hey, my name is Tommy Preson Phillips. I am a 44-year-old pastor and musician and author. And me and DJ go back a long time. He attended my church when he lived in Tampa back in
Yep.
I think we were guessing the late 2000s, the O's.
Mhm.
Um, and man, I don't know what to say. I've been a musician for longer than I've been a pastor. And we just came back from Europe doing the summer festival thing. And
Yeah.
I sing and songwrite sort of Americana gospel stuff under the name Preson Phillips. It's my middle name. And yeah, I don't know. I've been pastoring Watermark Church in Tampa for about 22, 23 years now, something like that.
Wow, that's
So
how we know each other. Like you
yeah,
said, I was going to Watermark, and I'm very grateful that you were willing to come on the show. And I think this is a good opportunity to talk about a little bit what we're going to talk about up top, because it's a little different. People that normally watch my stuff will be like, you normally talk about movies and TV shows and comics and stuff like that. But with Trash Talk, one of the things I like about the show is it's an opportunity to spread my wings a little bit and talk about other things that interest me and intrigue me. And I grew up in the church, and there has always been a kind of, as long as I've been alive, a conservative vein through the church community. And as I've grown older, as conservatism has started to lean, let's just say, a little more fascist,
yeah,
I've seen the church kind of become enmeshed in that more. And so, as somebody that grew up in that environment, I've kind of wondered as I've seen this happen: is there a way to disentangle those ideas? We're not going to, in this discussion, I don't think we're going to get into the history of the religious right and Ronald Reagan and Phyllis Schlafly and all that stuff.
we were
It's
good.
more about the nature of the church and where it's at. And this isn't, for me, this is not me trying to proselytize Christianity or try and tear it down or any of that stuff. It's more of an
Yeah,
acknowledgement of, in the West, the Christian belief systems and all its different variations have a strong influence.
yep.
And so as we deal with things we're dealing with, I think it's meaningful to try and unpack that. And Tommy, I think you were the perfect person to come on. So I was very grateful when I messaged you that you were like, yeah, totally down.
It's hard to know where to start. I grew up and I was immersed in it. I grew up just evangelical in a parachurch organization. My dad directed a worldwide missions organization thing with had several Bible institutes in different countries and just in it, immersed in it.
Yeah.
And when you're in it, you can't see it for what it is. I think a lot of times when people think and talk about Christianity, they're talking, Americans at least, are mostly talking about one particular thing called evangelicalism.
Yeah.
I don't think that a lot of Americans are privy to the fact that there are many, many veins of Christianity that are very dissident, that are very
Yeah.
um, socially conscious and very aware, and that have been doing that work quietly for a very, very long time. They don't grow big. You don't notice them because a lot of them don't take their cues from the empire that in order to be successful, they have to grow big and strong and powerful and wealthy and rich, and get noticed and have a million followers.
Yeah.
Um, by and large, the movement I was raised in, evangelicalism, I've come to see it as by and large an authoritarian movement. I think
Mm-hmm.
it is accurate to say that the vast majority of evangelicalism is, and they don't realize it, it's inherently authoritarian because of its view of God, because of
Mm-hmm.
its view of how God, they, for instance, there's a general understanding through the atonement systems that are taught in the evangelical church that God is punitive, that
Yeah.
you get in line or God punishes you, even eternally. A 16-year-old girl could commit some sin and then die that year and then be tortured infinitely for
Yep.
all time, burning and falling or floating in the lake of fire, depending on how they describe it. And that if you go back and visit her 1.5 million years from now, she would still be just the same suffering for the things she did in that one
Yeah.
day.
Which
Um,
is great when they tell you that when you're a kid. It's so cool.
yeah,
It's such a cool thing to put on a young person.
it's invented. It's designed to generate hopelessness,
Yeah.
and submission. I was like I said, we just came back from Europe. Instead of taking my band this year, I went solo, but I took my family and we went to different places, different churches. And I'm a big church history buff. And, you know, at one point, we spent a couple of days in Paris, days off, and I went and stood there with my family and sort of explained sort of the architecture, what it's communicating from the power of the church. And, you know, it's not obviously not an evangelical church, but evangelicalism learned it somewhere.
Yep.
This general sense that there's all these figures across the front and they're all looking at different parts of the courtyard, and you can just feel like you can look at any moment, you can see at least one or two or three staring at you. And as you walk into the church, you're walking under the apostles all looking down at you, and above them is this picture of just torment and hell and just terrifying. And all of this is on purpose. It's meant to create a sense in the peasantry, if you will, that's all of us, of fear, and that there are huge, massive, eternal consequences for everything that we're doing, that someone is keeping check on it. And it's funny, we actually watched while we were there. This has nothing to do with anything, but we watched the Hunchback of Notre Dame while we were there, and there's this scene right near the beginning where the guy is going to throw a baby down a well or whatever, and he's treating people horribly. He's like torturing this woman and her baby, and I think she died or something. I don't remember. And then he looks up, and all the eyes of these saints were staring, and it's just a terrible thing. That's the vibe that they're meant to communicate. So evangelicalism and authoritarianism have always sort of gone hand in hand. It was when I began reading the writings of the early church. It was when I began reading the patristics of church fathers, realizing that they shunned violence entirely. They practiced something called Christian nonviolence, where they wouldn't serve in the military, they wouldn't serve in the Senate, they wouldn't, for the first couple hundred years, 200 or 300 years of the church. I've written extensively about this on my Substack. That the first few hundred years of the church, Christians were forbidden from like being a part of a church community and serving in the military. And I think Hippolytus even wrote about this, one of the patristics. And as this sort of began to awaken me up to, there's like, oh, there's this other strain. You know, I was pretty young and I'm starting to read this stuff. I'm like, I've never heard any of this. And then you begin to understand the role of like the Apostles' Creed, and you realize what a unifying document it is instead of this sort of threatening, pushing out document. And it's how it's very basic, and there's very simple things. It talks about who Jesus is, who the Father is, who the Spirit is, and who the Church is. Instead of how you understand Genesis or Revelation or sex or family or morality or monetary systems or democracy or capitalism, any of these things at all, these have nothing to do with the teachings of Jesus. The teachings of Jesus were very, very simple. And all of this sort of, a lot of us have been waking up to this in the last few years. There's this whole thing, deconstruction movement. Everyone's heard of it. Everyone's talking about it. And everyone's got opinions on it. And that's why we wrote actually this book, Invisible Jesus, is.
I got my copy right here too. Boom.
Sweet. Right on. The publishers love it when you hold up a copy.
Yeah. I did my homework before our discussion.
And so, like, this book I wrote with actually a professor of mine, Dr. Scott McKnight, when I was at Northern Seminary. And I had gone back to seminary in sort of a state of desperation. I needed more framing. I needed to make more sense of some stuff. And what we did is studied the book of Romans for 4 years. And it changed my entire outlook of the role of the church and how Paul's entire ministry was centered on meshing together sort of the oppressed and the powerful, and the weak and the strong, and the poor and the rich, the Jew and the Gentile, bringing them together. And he teaches them how to do this in that book. If you read it from front to back, you look at it and you're kind of like, oh, this is about how to go to heaven when you die. But if you read it actually back to front, he taught me how to read it differently, the way ancient texts are written. And it became this sort of like book centered upon equality and liberation and justice, and it was just the most beautiful, incredible thing. There is so much more to Christianity than the simple sort of pinky deep thing that we were raised in about pray the prayer, go to heaven, and then just be a really good citizen for some reason. There's a lot more.
Don't read Harry Potter. don't play Pokemon, and then you're good. You're good.
Yeah, I was never allowed to read Harry Potter. I read it to my kids about 5 or 6 years ago,
Yeah.
long after my deconstruction and everything and rebuilding. But like I was like, I've never engaged these books,
Yeah.
and so I read them every night. We would sit around and I'd read another book. We got halfway through book all the way up to like book 5. We got halfway through, and I was like, I'm tired.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
passed it
yeah,
off
yeah,
there.
yeah. I want to dive into the deconstruction aspect more, but before we do that, I do like to open episodes by asking my guests if there's something they're into that they'd like to share with the audience, whether it's a movie or a TV show, whatever.
I don't see a lot of movies. The only TV show I'm watching right now is with my wife. It's called Station 11. That's kind of
Okay.
cool. It's great.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
apocalyptic kind of thing.
Yeah, I've heard good
I'm
things.
super into music, so like I'm always looking for new bands, and I've been disappointed for years with the music that's been coming out. But in the last like 6 months, there's been this new wave of like really good grunge music, sort of a grunge rebirth thing going on.
Yeah,
And I've been listening to this band called Hotline TNT. This album called
cool.
Cartwheel, and it's great. And then I just created a station on that. I found incredible bands like Wednesday and stuff like just such a good sound. It's an old sound, but they're doing it new. It's great. Check it out.
This
Hotline TNT.
I wrote a note to myself. That's one of the things I like about this, asking people this, because they'll bring stuff up, and I'm like, because I'm very enmeshed with movies and shows because I talk about them for work, and comics obviously behind me, and music I love, but I'm not as surrounded by it as I am. So I wrote a note, Hotline TNT. I'll check it out.
Right on.
So going back to your book is a lot about deconstruction, and I was hoping you could talk more about maybe your deconstruction journey within Christianity and within the confines, like going back to the media thing when we talk about like deconstructing the superhero genre or whatever. When it comes to Christianity, what do you mean when you say deconstruction?
It's a big question. Deconstruction, more or less, is sort of the unwinding of something. You look at it and you're like, it's not functioning right. It's not accomplishing what it was supposed to accomplish until you begin to take things away. There's a academic version of deconstruction, and French philosopher Derrida writes all about this. That's not how people are using the phrase today, and so that's not necessarily how I'm using it today. I have lots of philosopher friends that deal with all that stuff, and they're having completely different conversations than I am. I'm here for people in the church whose faith is falling apart, who read something and who that thing sort of jammed in their entire their faith system, and it no longer functions right because there's this piece that they now know that throws everything else off. And so in order to make that fit, they go to move something else, and then they have to move something else and move something else. And eventually you sort of have taken this whole engine apart of your faith, and you're trying to figure out, I don't think what it was running on is what it was running on. And what I thought was running on is what it's actually running on. And I want it to run on love. I want it to run on goodness and justice. And before it was running on something else. Like a lot of this started with the fact that I had a lot of friends who were leaving the faith, different parts of the world. And I had a lot of the same questions they had. And several of them had basically communicated that, like, I'm trying to become a more loving person, a more gracious person, peaceful, kind person, a patient person. And I go to church to connect with spirituality and the divine, and to learn about life and what it means, and these things that I want to accomplish, this person that I sort of want to become, that I feel deep inside my soul wanting me to become this healthy, good, loving person. I go to church and they're keeping me from doing that. They're making me less loving. They're making me more homophobic. They're making me more judgmental. They're making me more nationalistic. And the things that they're trying to become, which is Christ-like, because if you look at what Jesus is doing, he's teaching us how to follow the Spirit and cultivate the fruit of the Spirit, which is love and joy and peace, and patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These are all of the things that every human being wants. We have entire multi-billion-dollar industries trying to give you these things, trying to make you feel these things. And Jesus has shown us like there is a way to live a center of it all, that the center of the God of the universe, love, brings into our life, and he sent the Spirit to guide us. And Jesus was, if you look at the life of Jesus, he's guided by this same Spirit everywhere he goes. It says Jesus led him here, Jesus led him into the wilderness and to temptation, and that Spirit that he's following is leading him into the cultivation of the fruits of the Spirit. He's showing us how this works. Christ likeness is the goal of the Christian gathering. We gather to become loving and joyful and peaceful people. But sort of like there's this prophetic understanding from the Old Testament, for instance, like this prophet Ezekiel is able to point out that like you guys have been told to be the image of God, which is idol language. You look at a statue and you can see what that God was like by looking at the statue. So you are living, you together are like living idols meant to show the world what God is like. But you don't look like God. You look like the other gods of this world. And he says, and I had this vision that it's like it's chapter 10 or 11 of Ezekiel, where like the glory of God in the version of smoke, it sort of rises up from the temple, it goes to the edge of the city, and it leaves. And he's like, it's not here. And so like that is deconstruction language. All of the things that you were supposed to be, you are not. I don't think Jesus is here. I don't think God is in this place doing this thing. That's why we titled the book Invisible Jesus, because they're all claiming this name, but he's not here. You can't see him anywhere. And so the book that we wrote is sort of the publisher at one point called it the exit interviews that the church wasn't doing. And we did. It's full of stories of people being pushed out, people rethinking things and giving no space for their questions. People who brought valid concerns to the church and were kicked out, silenced, abused, all kinds of things. But also the whole second half of the book is a recentering of what we're doing on the teachings of Jesus, using specifically things called the I am statements of John.
You talked a little bit about people and their faith disintegrating. I don't know if there's one moment you can point to. I know you mentioned one in the book, but for you, as part of your deconstruction journey, is there a moment you can point to?
Yeah, there's a few. The biggest one I remember is when I was in my wife was going into the doctor for some kind of check. I don't remember what it was. I think it had to do with her pregnancy. And I was in the lobby hanging out, and as you do, there's a stack of magazines, and I picked up a National Geographic, and I was flipping through it, and I read it plenty of times. So I read this whole article on meteors and meteor strikes on Earth, and one of them I read about hit so hard, and it was so big that it was like some million number of equivalent to some million neutron bombs falling, and it was such a big impact that it created like a mountain range into a body of water, like a huge mountain range into the ocean. I think it was somewhere off the coast of Argentina or something. And I'm reading about this, and I had been promised from birth that the Earth was 6,000 to 8,000 years old, that evolution is not real, and everyone swore up and down that that's the truth, and anyone saying otherwise was lying to me. For money, which is very ironic. And so I read this, and I remember looking at it and thinking, well, we don't have any human record. If somebody would have written something down, big explosion, everyone died. Like, this couldn't have happened while human beings are on this planet. And I don't know why, but that was the piece that stuck with me. There's always like some random little thing. All the people I talked to, there's like, it was just the smallest. Someone said this offhanded comment, and it over the next year unraveled everything. So this kind of stuck in me, and I was reading more and more. I started watching shows about meteors and evolution and age of the Earth and this and that. I watched that show Cosmos that put out by Carl Sagan, and stuff started to break loose. And I couldn't tell anybody. And I was working at the church at the time. I was like the youth pastor and like associate pastor kind of person. And I had brought it up to a couple of people. I brought it to family and friends, and they were all just like, no. And they wanted to have debates about the word yom. It could mean the earth is old and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's what's going on. I think there's something else happening. And eventually I met someone. And so this actually connects to like the 3 stages of deconstruction. I walked through them. The first one is like, we call it liminality in the book. It's sort of this transitional phase between belief and unbelief. You're trying to make sense of this new thing you're holding, and you don't know where it fits on the faith body. And you have anxiety and sort of begin to feel alienated because you can't talk about this thing. and you can't take part in conversations about this topic anymore. And what helps is that I encountered somebody who was already there and past it, but I didn't know they were. It's one of the elders in the church, and he was a bit of a scientist. He was an engineer, and I was hanging out at his house helping him with something, and I mentioned something about evolution because I had been watching so many shows about it. It just slips out, I guess sometimes you're subconsciously testing the waters. And he goes, "Oh, evolution? Yeah, I believe in evolution." And he's like, "Do you want a beer?" And he opens the fridge, grabs a beer, and he just kind of moved on like it was nothing. But it was the biggest faith crisis I'd ever experienced because I had been told that Jesus believes in creation, 7-day creation, and that Jesus taught 7-day creation, and that if you reject this 7-day creationism and younger thing, you are rejecting Jesus. And I couldn't no longer. I was worried that I could no longer follow Jesus, who I was very into, because I was doubting this thing which seemed to hold no weight, and I became incapable. I had to admit I'm incapable of believing this. I've seen too much now. And that became a sort of a launch off point for a lot of other things, because I came to realize through meeting somebody who was already there, who was Christ-like, he embodied the faith that I wanted to become, and yet he held this thing that I didn't understand you could hold. That right there was enough for me to take a deep breath and settle down and say, oh, maybe the path is not near as narrow as they had been told me, I had been taught that it was. And then it pushes you into the phase 2, which we call elimination. It's when you begin to shed the things that you're like, well, with that goes this, and with that goes this. Obviously, if you can't read it literally, then literal reading goes with it. But if literal reading goes with it, then you have to create some disciplines to figure out, well, what's meant to be taken how, and that changes how you read, and that changes how you. It just goes and goes.
Yeah.
Eventually, you end up one day and you sit up and you hear your own faiths that you grew up in spoken by somebody else, and you just think it sounds insane. It sounds crazy. I have people talking about raptures and all the Christians disappearing and Nicolas Cage movies. You know what I mean? Like, and you're like, this is incredibly sci-fi. I feel like some grifter sat down and wrote this up, and come to find out, actually, that's literally what happened with the rapture. But after elimination, when you begin to shed the things that don't fit anymore, you begin to actively unlearn and unwind your faith, and you begin to get down to the core of it. It almost always drives you back to studying the early church and these guys and what they were doing, and you realize, oh, this is a group of people living in intense oppression, who spent 3 years following Jesus, who taught them about worldly power and about the power of God and how different they are. One is power over, and it's violent, and it's coercive, and it's empire building, and you can read all about it in Revelation, how it rises up and it oppresses, and it falls, and there's these cycles. And then you have Jesus, who has none of this power. He's not wealthy, he's not handsome, he's not any of this. And Jesus is gathering all the ones who have been pushed out and shunned by the empire, the ones who they do not care about, because all they care about is status and honor and all these things. And Jesus sort of builds this kingdom. He looks at you look at Rome and you look at what Jesus was doing, and it's like Rome flipped upside down, the lowest to the highest. And we conquer through nonviolence, and we win through losing, and we gain wealth through giving away riches, and find a new kind of wealth. And it's so much more than I ever imagined it would be. And this is where the third phase comes in, which is liberation. It's when you find this new freedom and this new faith, and you begin to live out this reconstructed thing, and you realize just how free you can be to follow Jesus, knowing that it is the most loving path you can live. That when you look at any situation, you don't have to worry about what comes after it. You have to worry about what is right. And you do what is right, what is most loving, what is most just, what is most, what creates the most evenness, what provides, the things that are Christ-like. And then you don't need to ask these questions about, is it capitalism, is it socialism? It's Christ-likeness, and it's the Christians saw themselves as this wholly separate entity from Rome. They were a surrogate family and a surrogate government. They had their own way of being, their own way of gathering, that dissented purposely against society. They were just punk rock dissidents. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and you've touched on hard for me because there's so many different things that I'd like to touch on that when I was thinking about what we would talk about, I wanted to kind of like limit myself. Like you touched on a little bit, but I kind of wanted to, something that came to me is like the literalism, how literalism is used as a form of control, and it's like, okay, well, maybe we'll get to that, but I as I've moved away from the church, I've spent time thinking about, because I don't think. I kind of thought that we were past this, but I've seen a bunch of stuff on Blue Sky recently that's like, oh, religious people are the dumbest people. And I'm like, I thought we were. There's so many shitty atheists that I thought we kind of learned that it's not religion. Religion is just one.
Yeah, we all watched the new atheism movement rise up, get real
Yep.
bad, and
Yeah.
become fundamentalists and tear each other apart. We all watched it happen.
Exactly.
We're all the same.
A question that I've wrestled with is the idea of what is the function, what is the ideal function of the church in society? Because I don't believe we would be better with getting rid of faith, especially since
Mm,
art I find very meaningful, and to me, art is a spiritual practice. Like that is a thing. So
yeah.
if you start getting rid of like faith and spirituality and everything, you're starting to whittle down parts of life that I think are actually very important. And I think we kind of going on with what we're just talking about, we are in a society run by people that don't have any value in that, which is
Mm.
part of when you're talking about AI and everything. We're going to get into it more in a second of what the church as on a public scale is doing. But what is an ideal way? What is the church function in our culture?
So I think, let's see. So you said something at the end that sort of like sent my answer in a little bit different direction, because I think what the church is doing publicly right now stems from its answer to this very question: what is the role of the church? And they believe the role of the church is to, I guess, get power, and they believe the role of the church is to be on top and to rule until God comes back or something like that. That's
Mm-hmm.
not anything near close to what it's probably what I used to believe. Um, the role of the church, I'm going to go. You ever hear of Stanley Hauerwas? Him? Kind of a
No.
theologian thing. Okay. He's a pretty old man now. He's an Anabaptist theologian. Has been writing for a lot of years, and I'm going to go with something he said. The role of the church in the world is to be the church, and the church should be the church, and the world should be the world. And he's saying a
Mm.
lot there, and it's sort of like it's a bit subversive. But I think um, to one of the ways I can explain it is this week I'm actually preaching on John chapter 12. There's this thing called the triumphal entry of Jesus, where Jesus, it's the Palm Sunday thing, where he's marching, he's riding in on a donkey, and everyone's waving palm branches, yelling Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna,
Yeah.
and which means like the Savior is here, he's coming. Um, so if you read, there's these New Testament scholars, John Dominic Crossan and others, who write about how every year on Passover there was a parade, and it would enter in through, I think he said, the east side, and it was Pilate, led by Pilate on a horse with all his soldiers, and they're walking and they're clanging and they've got their leather squeaking and metal, because they've got horses, and they've got the troops and all their weaponry, and they're marching in because it's Passover, and they want to have sort of a big presence to make sure that the Jews aren't rioting, and make sure the Jews know that they are occupied, that they know who's in
Yeah.
charge. Um, in the year around the year 30, when Jesus enters in, where we sort of see him in the Bible going in to celebrate the Passover as well, he comes marching in on the same day from the other side of the city, and he's riding a donkey in
Mm-hmm.
mockery of Pilate on his horse. He
Yeah.
is he's surrounded by peasants walking behind him in mockery of the strong soldiers.
Yeah.
Um, he's got crowds of people waving the palm branches, which were a symbol of the Maccabean revolt, where a very small number of people conquered the Seleucid army and drove them out and won their town back. This is a protest. This is like an
Yeah.
Antifa protest. Like this is um, a a dissident mockery of what is happening at the same time on the other side of the city.
Yeah.
Um, the role of the people of Christ is to witness to the world another way, that there is another king, that violence begets more violence,
Yeah.
that hatred begets more hatred, that unevenness begets more unevenness,
Yeah.
um, and that Jesus is our king, not Caesar. I mean, I also was raised to believe that people, that the nations of the world have persecuted Christians because they hate us, because we're Christians and they hate God. Um, that's not at all why the Christians have been persecuted. The Christians
Yeah.
were persecuted, especially in the first century in Rome, because they declared that Jesus was king,
Yeah.
and that if Jesus is king, Caesar is not.
Hmm.
It is people who refuse to assimilate. They were people who refused to respect the classes that Rome had set out amongst them. They gathered their churches together, and um, out there were masters and slaves and men, women at different levels, and immigrants and and Greek speakers and Jews and Roman citizens. And at the table around the Christian table, it looked a lot more. The early Christian gatherings were a meal, um,
Hmm.
and the table settings were supposed to be equal.
Yeah.
Everyone was equal because it's Christ's table, and under the foot of Christ, everyone is equal. And this gathering formed society. If you
Yeah.
started going to this gathering, you began to see people differently. You began to learn to love the people who you were taught to hate. You begin to learn how much more you have than everyone else, and you begin to find that the true riches that bring you joy are 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 the ones that you give to the people who need them around you and provide.
Yeah.
And there's if you fast forward like even a century into the church, you see some of the leaders of the church with names like Onesimus, and Onesimus is literally a slave name, which means useful tool.
Mm.
And these slaves in their real world, they're slaves, and they come to the church gathering, and they are leaders of a church.
Yeah.
And high status people might be in that church who in society are light years above them, and here they submit to the slave
Yeah.
and his teachings. And the role of I say all this to sort of create a picture of like, there has to be a group of people who stand in front of the tank at Tiananmen Square
Hmm.
and who say,
Hmm.
no, let
Yeah.
evil come. This is Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I believe it was. He said, let the evil come, let it conquer, let it win if it must, but not through me.
Hmm.
We will be a people who show the world a body not going along with
Yeah.
injustice and indifference and hatred. Um, it is a call to be a prophetic, embodied human who is not living your own life. You are embodying Jesus and living Christ's life, and so you take up your cross, and you learn to follow the Spirit, and you learn to let the fruits of the Spirit be. You learn how to cultivate the fruits of the Spirit in you, because when you are in the world, you recognize that I am taking the presence of Jesus. I am the presence of Jesus in this place. And the only Jesus they're going to see is the body that is here now, which is the church. And it is a
Yeah.
call literally to just live different as the kingdom of God, rather than in America, you stand, you confront the American lifestyle with the life of the Christian. And there are
Hmm.
things you don't go along with. And there are things, and it's not like you get in the church and suddenly you're there and the church is all doing it. Um, we come together regularly in various different ways to figure this out, how this
Hmm.
works. We're a group of people. We do it once a week around tables and have deep discussion and debate for hours, sitting around tables, feeding after we all fed each other, make sure everyone has what they need. We do it on Sunday mornings, where we practice the sacraments of communion and sometimes baptism and worship and the preaching of the gospel. And we take time to submit to each other and serve each other communion and look each other in the eye and say, you are welcome here. Rich, poor, gay, straight, all of it. We all are equals, and we are pulling each other together towards this higher way of life that Jesus has shown us.
Yeah.
And in this, the miraculous begins to happen. You begin to see lives being healed, and you begin to see the excluded begin to be included and centered. And oftentimes they become leaders because you realize that God is speaking to them. It's a whole different posture of how to live
Yeah.
in the world.
Well, the church you describe sounds nice, and it's not the one that obviously there are elements of the churches I grew up in, but the I guess how to phrase it. I guess the most vocal people out there and or the administration and politics and stuff like that, in the public sphere, will probably not agree with you about
Of course
that.
not.
And you touch on in your book. You and your co-author write, it seems evangelicalism has aligned itself, married itself, if you will, to the Republican Party. 4 out of 5 evangelicals vote Republican. You go on to say sociologists are discovering, somewhat surprisingly, that American evangelicals do not choose their political party on the basis of their religion. They choose their church of their faith expression on the basis of their politics. And so I kind of wanted to transition into from I was going to say an outsider's perspective. It's like, am I an outsider's perspective? But anyway, it feels like political conservatism has basically consumed evangelicalism.
Yes.
And political conservatism has been consumed by Trump.
Yes.
And I want to see if you're more. You talk to more church people than I do, I assume. I wonder if that feels true to you. And then I guess the follow up that we'll get to is like, is there a way to disentangle that, or are we all going to go down? Is there a way to, I guess, how should I phrase that differently? Is there a way to communicate to people that view Christianity that way, that might not be that might not align with the teachings of Jesus?
I have never been very effective at convincing people to walk away from fascist forms of Christianity.
Yeah.
All I've been able to do is make people walk away from our church. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
well, I mean, that's why we wrote what we wrote. Like, it's funny because back in 2018, 2019, I mean, at our Easter service, we had like 1,000 people. And then after we came back from COVID, by the time that hoopla was over, and I was very honest and tried to pastor as well as I could and towards Christ likeness, by the time we gathered back together, we had like 200 people, 250 people.
Yeah.
Which the funny thing is we never struggled with what we needed either. We just always had it. I've never been good at detangling that. There's a lot of people that have written very compelling writings about that work for those in my camp who fancy themselves missionaries. There's a book called Disarming Leviathan that is about how to reach our Christian nationalist neighbors and save them. It's basically like it's like sending missionaries to save Christians now. And there's so one of the books that shows you how we got here is Jesus and John Wayne by Kirsten Dumais. And it's sort of like this book of receipts. If you look back, and you don't have to look back very far to see the wild leap from there to here. I mean, evangelicalism was originally started, and this is how it always is. These movements are always started from a good place of like, what they're doing is oppressive. Here's a new model, new thoughts, new centering thoughts to guide us. And it started off as this sort of, fringe movement, and it grew. And then as it became powerful, when things become well known, narcissists get drawn in, the power hungry people get drawn in, the systems of Babylon begin to reach in. This is all the coded language. I don't know how.
And to use a metaphor, what you're talking about, to use a metaphor that I think my audience might be more familiar with, if you look at the original Superman comics, he's throwing slumlords off of buildings and fighting weapons manufacturers, and then you fast forward to the 80s and he represents Reagan's America because he's the most popular and successful superhero. He's making people money, and so he starts taking on the ideology of the moneyed people. So this is a thing that we do.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember back in the 70s, when you attended our church, we were part of a denomination, and in the 70s, originally that denomination was planted because a pastor was bringing in too many poor people from the docks in New York City to his wealthy church in New York City, and they fired him because he wouldn't stop. And so he went and pulled the money he could and bought a building to house all these poor people and started training them and built a church out of it. And fast forward to the 1970s. They used to ordain women, and it was this very forward-thinking denomination. And then John Piper and John MacArthur get a hold of it. They come in, have some conversations with the board, and suddenly women can't be pastors anymore. And suddenly there's all these very stringent laws on on sex and family and all these things, and lots of new rules about who can do what, can and can't do what. And that just gets more and more and more until uh, they begin to look around and realize that they should start kicking out everybody on the fringes and pushing them to the sides. We left. We didn't have a home anymore. And you watch these organizations, they grow, they grow, they grow. They become very self-aware of how powerful they are.
Yeah.
And they begin to sort of circle the wagons and protect the power instead of the people who gave them the power. I mean, the only power you really have is the power that people give you out of respect. If you find yourself with a lot of influence over a lot of people, oftentimes it's because they trusted you enough and they wanted to become like you enough to say, speak into my life. And when you speak, I will listen and follow. They gave you that power. And then you end up sort of circling the wagons and protecting that. And you don't care about the people anymore. Now it becomes about protecting your power. This is just typical corruption. The book of Revelation is all over this. The book of Revelation tells about, these it speaks in story form, in sort of artistic, apocalyptic form about how the world falls into corruption and what it looks like. They call it Babylon. Babylon is this ancient trope in the Bible that goes back all the way to the very beginning. It was this evil city that hurt a lot of people, tortured a lot of people, did horrible things, enslaved them. And that word Babylon became the trope for every other nation in the world. And so they would see, kings acting bad, and they'd be like, looks like Babylon's moving in. The tentacles, the beast is the four horsemen of the apocalypse happens when it gets out of hand and it begins to fall. And that they understood in the text in the Old Testament that empires have this cycle that gets big and it gets corrupted and then it falls, big, corrupted, and falls. And they believed that Jesus was the one pulling them out of this cycle and showing them a new way, a king whose kingdom will have no end, who rules in peace and justice. It's really the language the Bible gives itself to speak about this. The Bible gives it's Babylon. And Babylon, as we are building, is always trying to build alongside of us. It's whispering in our ear about how the great, amazing things you can do and all the power you can have and all the people you can help. It always does it like this. Yeah. It's Judas saying, why did you pour this oil to Mary? Why did you pour the oil on the feet of Jesus and wash his feet? That could have been sold and given to the poor. Meanwhile, the whole time he's stealing money from the poor. It always is this two-faced beast, and it creeps in beside it. And so the Bible warns us about this kind of hierarchy. The Bible warns us against wielding power over other people, against having leaders who lord themselves over. It talks about lifting up the lowly and casting down the mighty and the strong and flipping this whole thing upside down. When we get away from these sorts of power of Jesus, power of Christ kind of teachings, when we begin worrying about fear and about who are the bad guys and fears of the sinners and all these things, this is when the hierarchy begins to build. This is when Babylon is building alongside of us. And this is when we know we should recognize it's heading towards destruction. All of the pastors, if you want a perfect example of this happening already, I mean, it's everyone always goes here, but the Third Reich, the rise of the Third Reich, you have this literally the German evangelical church supported Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich and the rise of the whole thing. They were fully in. He hung swastikas on their altars. They went along with it. They preached it. And then there was this other group of Christians called the German Confessing Church, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Ernst Käsemann, a bunch of others who stood against it and who said, obviously, this is not of Christ, doesn't look anything like Christ. They're using the words of Christ. They're twisting the book of John to make Jews evil people. And they're doing everything they can to make you not see Jesus in the midst of all this. And these are the ones, of course, that were rounded up and put in prison. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was killed, hung by a piano wire. Ernst Käsemann was preaching, and he had Nazis sitting in the back of his sanctuary. They would come every time to intimidate him in uniform. And eventually he said something they didn't like enough until they threw him in prison, where he wrote commentaries on the book of Hebrews. And this has happened time and time and time again, where the church becomes enraptured with Babylon. It's just the cycle over and over and over again. It's not surprising that it happened in our time. If it didn't happen to us, it was going to happen to our grandchildren. Yeah. It goes round and round.
Yeah, and it's you kind of touch on something that is kind of I was going to say bleak. That might be too bleak of a way to phrase it, but kind of discouraging in that it's when you talk about pulling people from that. You talked a little bit about your deconstruction journey. People have to be open to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People have to be open to maybe, because that was a big, and I think it was a very informative journey from going from Florida into college and then coming out west, is this journey of maybe you're wrong, or maybe the people, you know what I mean, like having the ability to be like, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I don't know, maybe and not necessarily saying all the things you were taught are wrong, but being willing to go through those ideas, being willing to interrogate those ideas, and being open to exploring your own belief systems, why you believe what you believe. Obviously, this whole conversation, you've been not only referencing the Bible, but referencing the context of the Bible, the historical context, the intent, the way the words are used, which of course I think in a lot of mainstream evangelical churches is not, it's only done as much as it's useful.
No,
as it's useful to,
people, I mean, modern readers, even a lot of modern pastors, they just read the Bible in English and just go with exactly what it says without a thought, without a dive into the context. I watched Clueless the other night with my teenagers. I had to explain the lingo.
Yeah.
Like, they're like, what does that mean? He's like, give me a fin. They're like, what? I'm like, he's asking for $5 because they're charging for, but the way he said everything didn't make any sense. He looked at me like, what did they just say? A whole sentence. And I interpreted the whole sentence, and they all started laughing because they're like, you had your own language too. I was like, pause. Now imagine reading a 2,000-year-old papyri and thinking that you can just read it and go with it. Like, you can't. You have to, like, it like, expertise is a real thing. It really does take, there's discipline and there's work and there's so much to gain from it all. That's my soapbox. Like,
I have some questions from the Discord, and we might have already touched on some of the answers here, but it might be worth unpacking some. Rydo, it's Rydou. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Do you feel like most Christians who support Trump just see Trump and MAGA as, quote, means to an end and put up with the vitriol?
No, honestly, I think most Christians who support Trump now just went too far and can't get off the ride, and they've said too much, and they've been a certain way to so many people that to change their mind now, they would have to renege on so many things that they have said and done, and admit that all along the way when they were defending him, they were defending evil. It's just, at this point, it's just pride. There's no logic. There's no spirituality involved. None of it. They all should know. I literally had talked to Christians, heads of like missions organizations at one point, and I remember early on in 2016, leading up to the election, he said, what do you think of this Trump guy? I was like, I want nothing to do with this. And he goes, I think he might be the Antichrist. And then I found out later that, like, but that's a whole conversation as well, the Antichrist thing. I found, he's like, and then I found out later that he's voted for him 3 times now. Like, it's just, at this point, culture mixed with white supremacy, mixed with pride. The inability to admit that we've ever been wrong, and that goes all the way. That's American. You know what I mean? That's as American as apple pie. It's we look back, and we just kind of go like this and pretend nothing back there actually happened.
You go back to Manifest Destiny. You go back. It's always, we are it. We are the kingdom of God on earth.
Yes.
So if we ever admit, like, because and like you're talking about, it goes back to, why are they changing museums? Because we can't admit we did anything wrong ever.
There's so much to say. My brain is it's full of things to say about this, and I don't even know where to start. You can't be a follower of Jesus and not live in the light, and not just be blunt and honest about what is going on. I mean, the story of Jesus starts with people being honest. It starts with John the Baptist standing at this river on the other side of the river from the city of Jerusalem. That the part of the river, it tells you where it was, and it's this exact part where they passed in originally to go and and move into Jerusalem. And he's calling people out. He's saying, exit the temple, exit the city. We've gone astray. The whole thing is bad. The whole thing is going to burn. The priests of the temple start coming out, the priests who have been ripping everybody off and abusing them for generations. And John is like, you brood of vipers, who taught you to escape the coming fire? He's like, no, you stay in the house and burn with the house. The whole thing is going to fall. We're leaving. That's, again, deconstruction. Ezekiel did it. John the Baptist did it. Paul did it. This is one of the roles of the Spirit of God, is to deconstruct the empires we keep building up.
You touched on something interesting too. This idea, and I think we've probably already talked about it enough. But I did think it was interesting, this notion of the Jesus as you present him is this kind of antidote towards authoritarian figures, and our cultural instinct using the language of saying he's a king is in antithesis to the traditional kingly role. But our instinct culturally is to take that language and then start building him into the shape of, well, now he's jacked and he has a sword and he, you know what I mean? And we feel this need to like make him the authority figure that he's supposed to be in opposition to.
Yeah, the picture of the cross is the perfect example of this. The cross is the opposite of a sword. It's an upside down sword. And Jesus teaches that the power, the power of Rome is power over, to coerce and to make fear, and so that they obey. It's the same power that church uses today. But Jesus shows us power under and power with. He puts the towel, he washes the feet of his disciples, he takes the form of a servant. He shares his power with other people. He blesses all of them and sends them out instead of being the face of it. He sends them out to do the work as well. He's sharing with everybody the load of what they need. It's what the Spirit does on Pentecost. All of this is meant to tell you there's another form of power in the world. It's not power over. Even the writer of Hebrews, we don't lord ourselves over others. That's what the pagans do. We come underneath each other. We support each other in this way. And the biggest symbol of that is the cross. And that's why the Christians have held up the cross as like, no, this is our power. This is what we fight with. We win by losing. And so the cross is this moment where Jesus exposes the evil. Like, he's a perfectly innocent man in the eyes of everyone, and we all watch as the empire executes him. It's like watching. It's what kicked off the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Like, you watch this man get kneeled upon and suffer and die, and people are like, he's not innocent, this and that. But like, that's why we have Jesus was perfectly innocent, and it still was the same way.
Yeah, this
is what the power of the world does, and we must learn to carry our cross, not our sword. We must learn to wield the power of Jesus, God, power under. And this is how to get off this rat race of rise and fall and war and vengeance and evil.
The other question from the Discord, and I think we've already touched on this, is Jake Hefner, why do you think there's such a strong, quote, Christian presence that skews conservative when Trump's entire life and career flies directly in the face of at least half of the Ten Commandments, and who knows how many other teachings of the Bible? And it's like you're already talking about this pride and the way the evangelical movement has been built up over the decades to connect to these ideas and used as a I mentioned it earlier, but part of the reason, I feel like, I don't know if you would agree, but I think part of the reason why Bible teachings tend to skew so literal is that is a good way to exert control on the listeners.
If you were to actually dive into the context, especially of books like Romans, you would not be able to keep teaching the sort of cultural morality that you're teaching. It wouldn't happen. And it's sort of, a lot of it is, if I can just maintain the surface level thing, I can make this say whatever I want it to say.
Yeah.
And then I can get up and talk for an hour or so and make you feel really, really good. And by the time you're done, you're going to want to go to the gym and put in those extra hours at work. And you're going to want to be a good American citizen and rise to the top of the power. What we want to do has always been the same. We want to take the thing that God has given us to form us unto Christ likeness and use it to form ourselves unto the beast of Babylon. And so Constantine takes the cross and puts it on their swords and shields and armor and marches in to kill people with the cross on their shield. This doesn't make any sense. This is like, it just doesn't make any sense. It's like vegans holding up meat and being like, this is our, like, that doesn't make any sense. So a lot of it is pride. A lot of it is powerful people wielding control. and not wanting to reckon with Jesus' teachings.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think I asked you earlier, like about your kind of deconstruction journey. I was it got me thinking, like, was there one particular thing? And I don't know if this was what started it, but it did just now. You reminded me of it. And I think it's worth mentioning. I remember I was part of the youth group, and we were all taking, I think it was a Michael W. Smith concert, and it was a much bigger church than the church we went to. And I remember when we were going in, there was a store in the church, like a bookstore. I'm like, I think I recall Jesus not being a big fan of this.
Yeah.
The context is different, but the fact that we're selling, like, it's a little capitalistic. I wouldn't have used the terminology of capitalism at the time, but it was one of those, like, wait, this doesn't feel right. So I guess as we wrap up, I think I would leave the audience with whether you grew up in a Christian community or not, listen to that feeling of, this doesn't seem right. Something about this seems incorrect if you're looking at something and it seems coercive or abusive or like it's hurting more than it's helping. You follow that feeling, trace that feeling down.
Yes. Yeah. And to me, I'm sorry, I've been teaching the book of Revelation for about a year now. This goes back to like something John, the author of the book, is always doing. He's like, his vision is always like, and I saw this thing, and I saw this, and I saw this. And he's trying to get you to see it. He's telling the story in a way. He's trying to get you to see the work of Babylon all around you, to pull you away from the goodness of God, from the center of love, the universe, and to make it about yourself. And John's like, do you see it? Do you see it? Do you see it? The whole time.
I don't want us to get derailed because I could talk about you with Revelation for a while. But I do think it's interesting because and I remember you teaching on this back in the day. Jesus spoke in metaphor a lot, and so it's weird how we go with Revelation stuff like that. It's like, no, this is a literal thing that's going to happen, and not something that deals specifically with the time frame I'm in.
Revelation has Jesus on a horse with a sword out of his mouth, slaying thousands of people. Like, obviously,
this isn't
talking about his
metaphor.
Words. Obviously.
Well, tell the kids at home, first off, if you have any final thoughts, please share them, and then let the kids at home know where they can find your work.
I don't really have any final thoughts. I'm writing a series on Substack right now called The Dissident's Guide to John. I already wrote The Dissident's Guide to Revelation, if you'd like to know more about that kind of stuff. It's those two things, by the way, Revelation and John, written by the same sort of community, so they have the same mindset, which is why I wanted to keep this going. So I write on Substack that under Tommy Preson Phillips, and I've got like 5 or 6 albums of just sort of stuff I've written for the church that you used to go to, that I've written for the church over the years because we hated a lot of worship music. We didn't think it said what we were trying to say. We didn't think it sounded the way we were trying to sound. You know what I mean? So we, for 2 decades, have been doing our own music. So we have 5 albums up there under name Preson Phillips. And I have a book with my professor, Dr. Scott McKnight, and it's called Invisible Jesus. And the subtitle is a book about leaving the church and looking for Christ. Other than that, I think I've said everything I can say.
Yeah, check all that out. Check out a Substack. If you were part of the church, if you're still part of the church, if you've left the church, or if you're in the middle of your deconstruction process, I recommend checking out Invisible Jesus. Of course, if you're watching this video, you're at my personal channel, youtube.com/DJTalksTrash. I also have a podcast network called Only Stupid Answers. And if you want to help support the show, get some exclusive content, you can do that over at patreon.com/OnlyStupidAnswers. Thank you for checking it out. Tommy, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, man.
And we'll see everybody next time.